How's
Perfect.
that? Okay. We're going to go ahead and get started then. And I'm Karen Harrison, the Human Resources Director at Missoula County. And this is the first of our 3 interviews with our final candidates for the Library Executive Director. And thank you so much for participating. Each candidate will give a 10-minute presentation of their choice, and then we'll open it up to your opportunity to ask any questions you might have for the next hour. So I'll let Slaven Lee take it away. She's our first candidate. She is currently working at the Austin Public Library, but often resides here in Missoula too, so she's very familiar with our community. And I'll let Slaven give you an introduction of herself and then do her presentation. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Let me go ahead and pull up my presentation here, and then I'll do the intro. All right, so I'm assuming everyone can see where it says Public Libraries Future Ready.
Yep.
Great, thank you so much. So I'll be looking at the camera here, and then for the folks who showed up in person, I want to also say hello to all of you as well and hear from you here in a few moments. I'm going to talk to you a bit about myself today, the work that I've done. I want to talk to you about the strengths that I see in public libraries, and also talk about the opportunities that I see for the Missoula Public Library. So I used the title Future Ready because, as we know, from the last 18 months or so, the future is pretty unpredictable and the unexpected will likely happen. So I've really been thinking about what can we do to prepare for what emerges. Let's make sure this looks good. Okay. So I'm Slaven Lee. I am here because I love public libraries. I'm also here because I would really love to lead the Missoula Public Library. I have followed the work of the library pretty closely for a while now, and have watched as staff in the community and board members and other stakeholders have worked to build this gorgeous new library and provide new services to the community. And I know that you have a lot of great locations out in other parts of the community as well. That's probably a little hard to see. It's bright in here, but yeah, I don't know.
I think it's behind there.
Oh. It might help. I'll just keep talking though, if that's okay. Because what I'm going to say is mostly about me right now, so the slides aren't as important. So not only do I love public libraries, I also spend a lot of time here in Missoula. My partner is from Montana, also went to the University of Montana, was a state golf champion, which is very important for you to know. So we have family and community here in Missoula, and are here really regularly. My sister lives in Hamilton as well, so I go see her there pretty frequently. I really appreciate the sense of community here in Missoula, and pride and interconnectedness and loyalty to one another. I've experienced it myself and also witnessed it, and would love to be a part of the work here at the public library in relation to all of that. A little bit about my background, and I'm happy to answer specific questions, so I'll just do a general overview. But I'm originally from Ohio, so I got my undergrad degree at The Ohio University. I am currently enrolled in the Public Administration Certificate at the University of Montana. I thought it was, I'd heard from people that it was a really great program. I wanted the opportunity to network and meet other leaders, nonprofit and public admin leaders who work in the state of Montana and Missoula, and that's been the case so far. I've met a lot of great other students and had some wonderful professors. So I found that really helpful. I'm currently at the Austin Public Library in Texas. Someone said earlier in another interview that Austin is the Missoula of Texas, and that resonates. We can get more into that a little bit later. But I'm the Customer Access Division Manager. So my teams are responsible for allocating funds and deciding what to buy for 20 branches and 1 central location. So we buy all the books, all the media, all the digital resources, and we make sure that those meet community interest and that those resources are allocated in an equitable way, so that everyone in the city has access to really great resources. So not only do we buy and acquire all that stuff, we process it, and then we make sure it's easy for patrons and the staff to find it easily online. And then the next part of that is that we're also responsible for issuing library cards. So we work to make sure it's easy for people to get library cards, and then also that it's easy for them to use the library card that they have and understand what resources are available to them. So it's a pretty big job and kind of touches every part of the public library system there in Austin. I was a community library manager with the Queens Library in New York City for a while. That was a really great experience. I was responsible for an incredibly busy branch. Something like 25,000 people used the branch every month in a really diverse, rich community that was composed of different immigrant groups throughout the years. I was with the King County Library System for 10 years. My last position there was as the Information Services Manager, which meant I was responsible for staff in 6 libraries who worked the front lines of those libraries in South King County. And then also, I'm really proud of this. I was the board president for the White Center Food Bank in Seattle as well. That work has been really meaningful for me, and that was a great opportunity. So libraries are in transition. We know this. We also know that social isolation has been heightened by the pandemic. So I'm really interested in the ways that public libraries, and I know that the Missoula Public Library is already doing this, use this opportunity to build on what we've learned in the last 18 months or so to bring people together and mitigate some of that social isolation that people are experiencing. I think the library is a great opportunity to connect people. Libraries are essential in improving the quality of life of communities and individuals. All the things that we offer, all the connections that we make are really important in enhancing people's quality of life. It's interesting too, because we're connected in a really unique way. Public libraries serve everyone, so we're not just serving one particular population. Anyone who wants to come to the library can and can access our services. So that gives us the opportunity to identify trends in a community, identify priorities, see where there are needs, and figure out where we can fit in, either by providing those services or connecting people to other services and connecting with stakeholders. So I'm going to share some more thoughts, and some of these points come from a study that recently came out from a national organization called the Institute of Museum and Library Services. So I just want to acknowledge that this is some big data that was collected nationally. I'll link to that presentation later, the paper later, if you're interested in it. So we know that libraries are trusted connectors in communities. The hub model that's happening here in this building, where there are several partners in one building, is an example of how the library can connect people. And I think this is a great opportunity to take that model out into the community and demonstrate ways that the library can provide those connections, whether it's through book clubs, book trivia nights, programs focused on equity, diversity, and inclusion. There's just lots of opportunities for us to demonstrate how to be a trusted connector. I'm also interested in how libraries support economic development. So the Urban Libraries Council recently came out with a calculator that allows you to plug in all the stuff that the library does for the community and demonstrate that economic value. So whether that's small business programs, supporting entrepreneurs, having various resources, the library is really great at connecting, making those connections as well. And so when I'm talking about connection, I'm talking about connection to a place, connection to people, and connection to resources. And I think that's a place that we really thrive. Libraries, and anyone who's a library worker knows this, are increasingly relied upon to fill social service gaps. So we're really rooted in developing meaningful partnerships. It's not about us just referring someone to a service and then never following up. We really want to make sure that if we can't help a person at the library because maybe they need help with housing, or maybe they need help getting their SNAP benefits, or something outside of the realm of what libraries can do, we make sure that we make really great referrals. So I feel like that in the future is a place where libraries can really continue to shine and do even more. I know that health literacy is an emerging trend. At the Austin Public Library, we recently got a telehealth grant There are many libraries out in the United States that are doing that. And what that means is that we can now start offering confidential private spaces for patrons who want to access telehealth. Maybe they don't have internet at home, they don't have a computer, they want more privacy, whatever. So we're going to start offering that service. And my team is working really hard to collect books, magazines, and other materials that are relevant to health literacy and make sure they're available to people when they come to the library for that telehealth. So I think there are lots of ways that the public libraries and the Missoula Public Library can offer those services. And I wanted to acknowledge that MPL's already, you know, there's the Memory Cafe, which is really interesting and innovative. To me, that falls into that health literacy realm. There's also the Family First partner here that provides a lot of family and children education. So I think that falls into this category as well. There's just a couple more things really quickly. I mentioned that I had been a volunteer and the board president for the White Center Food Bank. I think that's an opportunity for public libraries to advance equity and inclusion and also fill those social service gaps and be a connector, because we know that kids experience difficulty learning when they're hungry. And we know that when parents are working really hard to find food for their family, they miss out on opportunities. And I believe that recognizing and connecting those intersections out in our community is the work of the public library, and it's a great opportunity for us. Libraries can also be the catalyst for increasing equity and inclusion. We have the opportunity to host, you know, critical conversations around whatever's going on in the community and talk about those issues. We can build collections based on exposing the entire community to equity, diversity, and inclusion. We can, you know, look for representation in design of spaces, materials, all of that is inclusion in action. MPL's mission to welcome all people in pursuit of their freedom to read, learn, and discover really sets the tone there and means that we can be a real catalyst for that. A couple of ideas that I was thinking about is just that it would be really great to see any family that's on SNAP benefits, formerly known as food stamps, working with local food banks to make sure that those families all had library cards and understood what resources we have. That sort of thing. That's equity, and then that's also filling those social service gaps. Moving on, so when I was in Ridgewood, Queens, another example of providing those social services, but also making sure to be inclusive, I partnered with a couple of local organizations and a school to make sure that at-risk students had the opportunity to use the library and understand what that the library was for them, understand what our rules were so that they could stay in the library, but also it allowed us to build relationships so that we could be a little more flexible around what that looked like for the kids. And I can go more into depth regarding that example if you want. So I believe that our strength is in knowing the people, knowing the resources, and knowing the systems and bringing those together. So that spans the gamut of what we do, whether it's programming or providing resources. The public library is really primed to do those sorts of things. And I think that considering how beloved the Missoula Public Library is and the connections that already exist, we have the opportunity to build on that even further. So I'll end with a quote that's probably difficult to read because it's still a little bright in here, but basically this is just about how important authentic and generous connections are in your community. And again, regarding public libraries being that connector. So I'm really eager to lead that work, continue the work that's already happening. And I see a lot of opportunities here in Missoula to continue doing the work. Thank you. That's the end of the presentation. So that's nice.
Thank you, Slaven. Hopefully everybody online can also hear me, but we are now open for questions. And on the Teams meeting, if you want to raise your hand, Slaven can then answer your questions if you're attending virtually. And anybody in the room, I can bring the microphone to you so people on Teams meeting can hear you. So anybody here like to ask some questions?
My name is Connie, and I really appreciate the opportunity to hear what you have to say about this new position. And I want you to know, you probably know this, I have two little kids, and I've been a police officer for 18 years. And when I hear this message of community connections and inclusion, and also speaking about at-risk youth, I think that the library can provide quite an opportunity to build a bridge between our community and law enforcement in a way that maybe has been neglected or compromised. There's a lot going on. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll kind of use some of my own experience to speak to that. Working in South King County, being responsible for public services staff in 6 libraries during the height of the opioid epidemic, we experienced sort of, it felt sudden, but it wasn't, but a sudden influx of people who were using drugs in our building, violence in our buildings, people just struggling with mental health issues because there weren't enough resources, people experiencing homelessness. And that was tough for us to navigate because we had to figure out, how do we provide library services to people who are in this kind of need? So we did a lot of training and team building around that sort of stuff, and work to really understand that the environment was ours to manage, and that we wanted to manage that behavior as much as possible without having to engage with law enforcement, just because they were strapped too, understaffed, overwhelmed, dealing with stuff everywhere else. So my management team and I did a lot of meeting with the various police departments, because the 6 libraries covered different parts of the county, so they had their own departments, to just sort of gain mutual understanding. What are the values of the library? We maybe might let someone do some things that the police would consider not okay, and they should be excluded from the building. So we worked really hard to kind of communicate each other's values, and it was challenging work, but I could see ways that it demonstrated bridging that gap. We also kind of came up with an agreement around, if you call 911, here's what you need to tell them. Be prepared to tell them this because it makes our job easier. Came up with some expectations around, maybe don't call 911 every time someone's drinking in the library. Try to manage that locally, so that someone understands, hey, you can't drink in the library, but you can stay here if you stop drinking. So, I mean, it was an ongoing process, but I feel like having direct, honest conversations with law enforcement helped them kind of see our values and helped us understand what would help them do their work. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Oh, you got to use your mic. I'm sorry.
I agree with all that, and I think it's really good on the front end to know what expectations are on both sides. I'm also curious your thoughts on what would be a less reactive approach, but more proactive, in how we as officers can work or connect with our community, and how the library might facilitate that.
Mm-hmm.
As an example, one thing we've started to do is a coffee with the cop. So we show up in coffee shops and just are there to greet the public, meet with them, have a cup of coffee, and sit down and answer questions. So I'm curious your thoughts on what the library can do.
Yeah, that's a great point. I've definitely been part of community conversations with the police officer before, where the officer comes to the meeting room and, stands where I'm standing and accepts questions from the public. Well, why is it like that? Why are you doing this? Why didn't you respond to my call when I called you? Or why are you in the library at all? Just depending on what someone's viewpoint was. And I just think that those conversations really helped build those relationships and build transparency. We eventually hired some off-duty police officers to be guards in some of the libraries. And we had honest conversations with them about, well, here's how some of our patrons feel when they see someone in uniform. But it also allowed us to have empathy for what it felt like for the officer, to kind of feel that tension too, when to him, maybe he was just there to help. So I just think honest conversations, public forums really help. We received some training from police officers around, some staff were feeling nervous about gang activity, and we had a police officer come in and be like, well, here's what that actually looks like. So I think listening to each other really helped. I do see hands online whenever it's time for that. Oh, you got it? Okay. Who'd you say, Kirk?
I think Kirk first.
Okay, Kirk, it's your turn.
Hi, Slaven. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So my name is Kirk Friesman. I'm the executive director of the Montana Library Association. I also worked as a reference librarian at Missoula Public Library for many years. My question has to do with intellectual freedom and the freedom to read. Montana libraries have had a number of book challenges recently. They've been in the news. And although book challenges are nothing new to libraries, there does seem to be a growing trend both nationally and here in Montana. So my question is, do you have any direct experiences with book challenges while working in libraries? And how would you handle one if it occurred at MPL?
That's a great question.
I have to repeat the question.
Oh, you couldn't, that's right, because it's just coming from my, let me paraphrase. I'll try to do it justice. So Kirk is asking about recent book banning and challenges that libraries have experienced, particularly here in Montana. So he had a question about the freedom to read. Have I ever experienced book challenges? Talk about intellectual freedom. And am I missing anything, Kirk?
No, I think you got it.
So that sort of thing. Is that okay? Okay. So very recently, in Austin, for those 20 libraries plus the central library, my team is responsible for buying all of the books, and I mean books as in all of the materials. So if there's a challenge, the buck kind of stops with me, which I'm totally fine with, but it's definitely a great responsibility. So recently, because as we were experiencing more challenges in Texas, because Texas is getting a lot of challenges too, I met with our director and let him know that I had come up with a statement because I felt like as a leader in Texas, the Austin Public Library really needed to say something about these challenges and the book banning that was going on. So he was really excited about that. It was well received, and our director took what I came up with, worked with our communications manager, and came up with a really great statement. If you want to Google Roosevelt Weeks, that's the name of our director, Roosevelt Weeks and book banning, you can find his statement. But I think what he did was he took the talking points that I came up with, which were partially from the Texas Library Association. Kirk is with the Missoula or the Montana Library Association. We took those resources that they provided to us and used what policies we had in place to take a really strong stance against censorship and against book banning. But what we really intentionally wanted to do, and I found this to be pretty effective, is change the conversation, reframe it from censorship, and talk more about the freedom to read. So who doesn't want the freedom to read what they want to read? Who doesn't want to have the freedom as a parent to speak with their children and decide, what's okay in your house, as opposed to deciding what should be on the shelf for everyone in the library? So that was a really strong stance. It was well received, got a lot of media attention, and other libraries kind of spoke to us about how much they appreciated us having that leadership, and city council really appreciated it too. I personally have not experienced a challenge before. My experience is more around patrons or the public being concerned about what people are looking at on the internet, and that sort of depends on what the policy of a particular library system is. At King County, there's no filtering or no censorship as long as it's not a crime regarding what a person can look at on the internet in the library. But I did recently revise our form for challenging materials, because if a patron wants to remove something, they fill out a form and then the director reviews it. So I made that language more clear, and I sort of referred it back to our materials selection policy, which communicates to the public why we choose what we choose, and our intent to collect accurate information, and encourages the public to make their own decisions as opposed to deciding to remove something for everyone.
Great, thank you for your answer.
Thank you. Bill? Phil with a P, it's your turn.
All right, Clayton, I really enjoyed your presentation and your background. It's really solid. And I enjoyed your conversation around what Montana means to you. And my question really kind of relates to that. I'm a user of the library, so certainly no expert on its operations at all. But when I go there to get a book or put something on hold, I notice quite frequently the book is actually at one of the other Western Montana libraries that we apparently collaborate with. And it makes, from my perspective at least, the Missoula Library be far bigger than it really is, because most of the books I get end up coming from somewhere else. I was just wondering what your philosophy would be in collaborating with these other libraries that seem to be part of the network, and what you would see your role in not only making the Missoula community better because of the library here, but the smaller communities in Western Montana as well.
That's a great question. So Phil uses the library. He often requests things from other libraries in the state because maybe it's not here in Missoula and they have a shared agreement. So he's curious around my philosophy related to that sharing and maybe related to what is available on the shelves. Does that work?
That's
Okay.
exactly it. Yes.
Okay, great. I have these kinds of conversations all the time. Austin Public Library, we stopped interlibrary loans during the pandemic. So that means we weren't loaning stuff to other libraries in the state, even though everyone's in agreement that they do that, just because pretty much everyone in the state stopped that during the pandemic. We were just too strapped for resources. But we recently started it up again, and we found that for every 5 or so books we send to other people in the state, they're asking us for 25. So we have an amazing $8 million book budget. We have a lot of resources. So other systems are pulling from our collections. We had to think about, well, what does sharing look like if really we're just mostly the ones sharing? But to me, we have the resources to do that. And what we do is we take information. If there's like a high ratio on a particular item, like 10 people are asking for it, but we only have 1 copy, that tells me we buy more. If you make a suggestion for us to purchase something and it's not too esoteric or too specific to like one particular person, then we'll buy it and add it to the collection. And whenever we buy something, we always buy at least 3 copies so that it can be available to our patrons. So yeah, that's my answer.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Who's next?
Comment to him about.
We have someone's getting the mic.
I just wanted to make a comment to Phil, because I know how this whole partnership works. And it's very interesting how many books that are no longer available in print that we're able to get through this shared catalog from the smaller libraries.
Mm-hmm.
And I know in the beginning, a lot of the smaller libraries were really freaked out about, the possibility of lending their books. But then when they started having the opportunity to get materials that they couldn't afford to buy, then they became more willing to share their materials. And it's very interesting what is available in those small libraries. I think this partnership that we have here in this state is outstanding.
That's great. It's working as it's supposed to. That's wonderful.
You answered quite a few of my questions I was going to ask you, but I guess I would like to know what you see as the role of staff in the overall operation of the library. How important do you feel that the staff are, and how involved would the staff be in the decisions that are being made in the overall operation of the library? I know some directors not want their staff involved. I just wonder what your philosophy is.
Yeah, I know directors like that too. That's a great question. We talked about this earlier in I had a session with staff only. They're the ones on the front lines doing the work, even if they have a behind the scenes job. They're doing the work. So I feel like that collaboration is really important. Knowing, what their thoughts, what their difficulties are, what their ideas are, that is really meaningful. And they also are people who live and are part of the community. So everyone is seeing different parts of the community and kind of can report back about that. So I think that the staff voices are so important in decision making, because I can make a decision, and if I haven't really collaborated with anyone or come into agreement about what we're doing, then it's the implementations will fail. So I think it's really important to engage staff in those decisions. And sometimes there are hard decisions that have to be made for whatever reason. Oh, do we have to close suddenly for something? And sometimes you can't get everyone's input about that, but I do think as much as possible, that's really critical.
So I'm just curious then, I've enjoyed your presentation. I think you have a lot to offer. I just wonder, what do you see are your weaknesses? If you have any.
I definitely do. What are my weaknesses?
Regards to this role.
Oh yeah, she said in regards to this role. I care a lot about this work, and I have a great deal of experience and knowledge. So sometimes I know that I'm right about something, but maybe it's not right for a particular situation. And when I find that people are frustrated or unhappy with a particular decision, that is, it motivates me, but it also, it can be a little demoralizing. Like, oh man, I didn't mean to, make the circ staff's life really difficult by making this small change. That wasn't my intention. So I can kind of personalize that stuff and feel pretty bad about it, but I try to, be as neutral as possible and understand that decisions impact people in different ways. And sometimes I don't think of every little way that something might impact people, which is why that collaboration is really important.
And then flip side, what are your strengths?
Okay. She's asking, what are my strengths? I would say relationship building. I'm really good at developing pretty meaningful relationships with people from different backgrounds, from different, positions, different, staffing levels, whatever. I'm pretty good at listening, having empathy, and learning what matters to people. So I would say relationship building is a really good strength of mine. Diplomacy, and then influence. I am pretty good at, because of that relationship building, having influence when needed, whether that's with someone on city council or the director of a particular library system, or the head of circulation, whatever. I feel like because I can have honest conversations with people and be pretty direct, that I have influence because of that.
I have one more.
Okay.
So why do you feel you should be the successful candidate for this position?
I feel like everything that I've done in my professional career has led up to this point. I have been curious about being a director for a while. I really want to be the person that leads a library system to do even greater good and have a bigger impact. But I didn't really ever see myself leading a particular organization until I started spending more time here in Missoula and coming to this library, meeting people here in Missoula, interacting with the community in different ways. Seeing what was accomplished here with this building is really incredible, and to me means there's a lot of goodwill and trust within this library and a lot of great leadership already. So I just kind of, I feel like this is the place for me because of that. I feel connected to it already, in a way where the sort of amorphously was like, oh, I want to be a director someday, but where? And then this absolutely made sense to me. It's something I've been thinking about for years. Thank you.
Sorry, more questions.
Please. I'm a librarian. I love
That's funny.
questions.
I appreciate your platform that you've presented us, which is the equity, inclusion, and diversity. And I also heard what you said about the just the social isolation that's going on here and all over the country, and that there is a role that the library can play in that. When I think of that, I think of our teenage population, and we know from what we're hearing in reports that there's a lot, they're higher risk, they're disconnected from their peers, there's a greater degree of suicidal ideation going on, and as a massive and free resource in our community, the library, I do think, has a role in that, and I'm wondering what you think that would look like.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of depends on the population that we're talking about, but with teenagers specifically, I know there's already a great youth services staff here. I'm not sure what the title is, but I think that any kind of programming or any kind of content that the library puts out into the community, it has to be in conversation with that population. So if we're talking about teens who are feeling socially isolated, then it's important to find some teens who are willing to come to the library and meet with us and talk about what would be interesting to them. You know, what would they like to see at the library? Because if your actual user group that you're identifying tells you this is what they want, then you're going to have greater participation. And what it means for one group of teens to feel like they belong to the library will probably be different for another group of teens. So it's kind of continuous work. So I feel like developing those relationships and really learning the needs of the community is really important. I think other ways to bring people in and make them feel included is to, one idea I have is working with, I think it would be neat to work with tribal leaders to come up with some kind of paid internship program, whether it's grant funded or whatever, where we can really connect more with indigenous communities, have them come in and work in the library in various roles and participate in a profession that is historically white and exclusive, and bring in new voices that reflect all parts of the community. And not to say that's not already happening, but I just think there are opportunities to develop programming around that sort of thing. Yeah. Any more online questions?
Is there anything you'd like to add about yourself?
Oh, sure. So Karen was asking if there's anything I'd like to add about myself. You know, I shared a few examples pretty quickly of my work in the slideshow or in the presentation. I think using the food bank example, I want to make it clear what I'm trying to communicate about that is that I feel like as a leader in the community, it's really important for me to be engaged with different organizations and different partners, and do work related to their mission too, because they're sort of all related. So I think, you know, being a food bank president really informed me about what was going on in my community in different ways. Food bank board president gave me information about my community in new ways that I wouldn't get just from my office in a library building. So I want to continue that work, and I feel like that will inform what the library needs to do. It will demonstrate new opportunities for partnerships. So that feels really important to me. A big project that I'm working on right now in the city of Austin, because one of my teams is responsible for getting library cards out to the community. I have revised our application, our responsibility statement, that in a way that will allow community members to get a library card even if they don't have an ID or an address. So as you can imagine, that has created a lot of barriers for people who don't have a home, who don't have an ID, or even, I used this example earlier, the CEO of Goodwill came into the Austin Public Library a year or so ago and couldn't get a library card because he forgot his ID. So it's about equity, but it's also about providing a great experience for people. So I was able to get that language approved by our legal team. I talked to one of the members of City Council about it, and she's really excited. So I think that change will have a big impact. But I'm making that change in conversation with staff. So I've met with a circulation committee that we have and talked about, well, how would this cause problems for you? What worries do you have? And we were able to kind of tweak the process so that they felt like, okay, we can give someone a library card, but how about if it expires in 3 months and they have to come back and try to show us their address or their ID? Okay, yeah, let's do that. So I tried to make that change in conversation with the staff who would actually be issuing those library cards. So that's something that I've been working on recently. And that's sort of, I'm doing that in so many ways. We just got a few hundred laptops that we're going to start loaning. We've started loaning out to customers. They can just take them home with them. But I had to work really hard to make sure our legal department was okay with that. Had to kind of come up with the fine structure for that because we're not fine free yet. That would, demonstrate that we want to get those materials back, but also not prevent someone from using the library if they made a mistake and hurt the laptop or turned it in late or something like that. Oh, okay. Claire, you have a question?
Yes, thank you so much for speaking with us today, Slaven. It's been a pleasure to hear about your experience and your qualifications for this position. I'm a library user and I also work in a library that is a partner of the Montana Shared Catalog. And we've seen libraries go through a ton of changes just in the last 10 years, kind of going from places where you check out books and study to these community gathering places. And I'm just curious what you think of for the next 10 to 15 years, where libraries are going, or what changes you would like to see as public libraries develop and grow.
Okay, so the question was about how libraries have changed in the last 10 years, how, previously it was more about books and study rooms and that sort of thing. And now there are other community engagement programs, stuff like that. That's what I'm hearing. And she's asking, what do I see for the future of libraries? That's kind of what I tried to capture in my presentation. I see that public libraries, and it's obvious that the Missoula Public Library has a lot of goodwill and great leadership already and is respected in the community. So to me, that means that we have that opportunity to continue to be a resource and a place where people come for connection, whether it's connection here in the space or getting connected to another resource. So I think we can build upon that work. I think the ways that we have been, that we've had to step up to fill in those social service gaps, that work will only continue. That health literacy example I used is an example of how we can kind of fill those social service gaps. One of the commissioners earlier was asking about what I thought about having a social worker embedded in the public library system. That's something that a lot of public libraries have done to respond to the needs of the community. So that's something to think about, but also I think it's important for us to think about how staff can come up with programs or procedures around referring to people to social services and also figuring out ways that we can meet those needs. And then I think being a real place for generating equity, inclusion is the work of the public library. It's related to intellectual freedom. It's related to what we have, the materials we have for people to check out and the conversations that start around those. And this library in particular is already a place where people congregate. So this is a great place to host those conversations, have a meaningful dialogue with each other in the community. So I see that as the future. It's already happening, but those are opportunities to build upon those things. And we'll always be that trusted resource for books, entertainment, spaces, and programming. So I think that that's something that libraries do really well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
You can enter live. And Slaven's available, just chat with too.
Yeah, Karen is saying if we end early, I'm available to chat on the way out if anybody wants to. And I would feel like that would include anyone online if you'd rather not talk in front of everyone.
I can remind them about the evaluation.
Sure.
Whoops. Can't see. Oh, I forgot to let you know too that we do have an evaluation form that you can fill out, and you can obtain that at the library website and send it to me. My email is on the form by Sunday at 5 o'clock. And we're gathering that information as part of our process. So feel free to fill that out on any of our candidates. And I'll hand out a paper copy to you here today if you'd like. Any other questions though, before we leave? Okay. Thank you so much for participating today.
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate it. I appreciate your time.